Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon on becoming an interpersonal mediator. My name is Dr. Mike Talbot. I'm the founder and CEO of UK Mediation, and I'm here this afternoon to present our webinar to you. Just very briefly about me, I'm originally a psychotherapist and came into this field about 21 years ago on the back of my interest in workplace stress, conflict in the workplace, mental health issues, and especially looking at how conflict impacts on people's well-being, what it is about conflict that's so difficult, why we get stuck in conflict, how anger works, how we can use the services of an impartial third party to move on from conflict and get through the emotional into the rational aspects of how we can get people to put their heads together and come up with their own solutions for how to resolve their disputes. That's my sort of take on mediation. So here at UK Mediation, we're very interested in the psychology of conflict and interested in what it is we have to do as mediators in order to resolve all sorts of conflicts. So today, we're going to be zooming in on the role of the interpersonal mediator and how you could, if you're interested, to get into this field, become an interpersonal mediator yourself. So we're going to be looking this afternoon in the next 40 minutes or so, for which I'll be speaking. And during that time, if you would like to comment or ask a question, there is the chat box that you can use on screen if you're watching this live. And if you're watching the recording, of course, do please get in touch with us. There'll be some contact details at the end. And I'll leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A as well to pick up any questions or comments that we've not been able to deal with along the way. So we have people joining us today, lots of people joining us today from within the UK and from around the world. So you're very welcome to join us from the far-flung corners of the earth to a snowy afternoon in Derbyshire. So this afternoon, what we're going to be doing is looking at what interpersonal mediation is, and a little bit about what it isn't and how it all works. So taking the lid off mediation and just having a think about how the process actually works to resolve people's disputes and how you can train and get experiences and gain credibility as an interpersonal mediator yourself. Why you would want to do it, really. I think there's a key thing there about the reasons to become a mediator. And towards the end, if there are topics or aspects of this interesting subject that we've not covered, you're very welcome to ask us any questions, and do use the chat box. Either wait to the end, or if you prefer, you may comment or question as we go along. So let's take a look first at interpersonal mediation. Let's talk about it and think about the kinds of disputes we are referring to with the use of this term interpersonal. I'm going to come on and talk about how interpersonal mediation contrasts with other types of mediation a bit later on. But first of all, let's just think about brass tacks. What sorts of disputes are we talking about? Well, first of all, workplace is one area where mediation has really taken off, not just in the UK, but in all around the world, really, in terms of personality clashes, allegations of harassment, bullying and poor treatment, either by managers and team leaders or by workers against managers and team leaders, within teams, across the board really, up or down. Harassment and bullying works in several directions. Communication issues and team disputes. So these are the sorts of disputes that an interpersonal mediator might take on in a workplace. And in a neighbourhood, the sorts of stuff we're talking about is low-level antisocial behaviour, issues to do with boundaries and fences, driveways, access, rights of way, parking, communal areas. And we have in quotes Leylandii disputes. This one must be at the front of our minds because it's this time of year that people start to realise that their neighbours' evergreens are way above a height that would allow that person to enjoy their garden. So you get these great big green walls of trees, which there is legislation in the UK and I'm aware in other countries around Leylandii, but one of the first recourses is to turn to a neighbourhood mediator, see if people can get things sorted out for themselves before we get into the litigious aspects of that. And the third sorts of interpersonal disputes we're thinking about are tenancy and landlord disputes. Very common, rent arrears. We've had many inquiries just recently through the pandemic in particular about people defaulting on rent, evictions which had been postponed. There was a moratorium on evictions for a while, which meant that there were also repair issues, particularly with maintenance people not being able to get into properties. Disputes around deposits, particularly in student accommodation, by the way, twice a year when there are deposits to be paid and deposits to be refunded. There are often disputes and basic fallouts between tenants and landlords over misunderstanding or non-adherence to tenancy agreements. A few more examples: interpersonal disputes in the medical arena. So where people have interpersonal clashes around in medical settings, giving and receiving bad news, choices around critical care or care that doesn't meet people's expectations, that even triggers this allegations of negligence, or issues concerning values, especially cultural or religious beliefs around people's choices of care. And there can be disputes between trusts or private medical care providers and family members or the patient themselves. And we know there have been some quite high profile disputes in this area. It's another area where interpersonal mediation comes in, as is working with family relationships. So talking about relationships in families who are trying to stay together, clashes with parents and guardians and a young person, issues in restructured families. So family relationship mediation. And the last example for today is about complaints. So people complaining about faulty or missold goods or services that don't meet expectations or are not delivered on time, communication breakdown, personality clashes. So I think you can see that in all of those examples it covers an enormous breadth of work and leisure, that interpersonal disputes can happen anywhere, anytime, and it is the role of the interpersonal mediator. Let's talk about how the interpersonal mediator might get involved in this and what it's all about. Well, let's think about, in very simple terms, what an interpersonal mediator can do in any of those areas is to bring about a better and a more constructive conversation. So that's our role really as mediators, is to make a conversation happen, is to build dialogue and to move away from these issues about who's right and wrong and move into the issue of finding a solution. If we can find a solution, then we can head off formal actions so that we can avoid things like grievances, disciplinaries, tribunals, court cases or evictions in the property examples that I gave. And ultimately what we're wanting to do with interpersonal mediation is to try and transform people's relationships so that we can get to a place where we're not just addressing the immediate dispute, but we're actually providing some robustness to the relationship so that if anything else happens between those two individuals, then they have a better dialogue, a better basis on which to resolve their conflicts. So I'm not suggesting that we can necessarily end all conflicts through interpersonal mediation, but if we can have people who are in conflict having a better conversation so that they can, instead of banging their heads together when things go wrong, they can put their heads together and come up with creative solutions for how to get around problems. So we're addressing more than just their immediate dispute. We're transforming the relationship into something more of a collaborative relationship rather than an adversarial or competitive relationship. That's what we're talking about with interpersonal mediation. And it has to be, we have to tick certain boxes for it to be mediation and not something else. So one thing about people who are in dispute who decide to take up mediation is that they have to choose to do it. So it needs to be voluntary. And we know from bitter experience that people can't be made to take part. And you get a lot of resistance, a lot of reluctance if the people that you're working with in dispute are told that they have to go through this process. You get people turning up with arms folded, sitting there saying, go on then, mediate me. And I guarantee you it doesn't work. So we have to be sure that the participants are there because they want to be there, and they have to be the ones that create the agreement. In creating an agreement, especially around more emotive disputes, it's important that people are allowed to speak openly and honestly, and we need to set up the conditions for that to happen. And one of the key conditions in terms of how we work as interpersonal mediators is the process has to be confidential. So we want to be sure that we're not recording the process, we're not retaining notes, that if there are any disclosures at all, these are only around risk issues or issues to do with, for example, child protection. But apart from those exceptional cases, The whole thing's kept private. We don't keep any notes. We don't record the process. And whether it's done online or face-to-face, or by telephone as it happens, we're not keeping any record or making any recording. And ultimately, when we have people in dispute who walk towards a private process like mediation, so it's voluntary, it's confidential, and they're ready to work on their dispute, what we're not wanting to do is to get into an evidential process of proving this or proving that, or showing this email trail, or showing this smoking gun. What we're interested in is, what are you going to do about this relationship starting tomorrow? So the whole thing is future focused. We're looking at getting away from blame and getting into an area where we're talking about a shared responsibility to make things better. Sounds a little bit vague and abstract, but actually the process works extremely well in terms of getting away from the blame, you're right and I'm wrong, and into a place where we say, okay, what shall we do differently? So let's have a think. There's some areas where it can be used, but let's have a think of areas where perhaps it can't be used quite so well, or where this model doesn't work. So interpersonal disputes we've talked about, and there's an area of commercial disputes. So can we use this interpersonal model for sort of commercial type issues? Well, not really. We need a different model for commercial, because quite often these commercial disputes that we're talking about, they involve more financial and contractual matters more than the interpersonal matters. And if people are going to be dealing with amounts of money or contracts or various financial issues, we need to be sure that they are being afforded their legal rights. So they would have their solicitors and experts to advise them or to accompany them, or at least to be on the end of the phone in the process. And sometimes, quite often actually, with commercial disputes, there's no ongoing relationship to be attended to. So maybe this is on the edge of what we can address with interpersonal disputes. There's a but. So if we're looking at a contractual or financial dispute, there's some reasons there, 1, 2, 3, why this model might not necessarily squarely apply. But on the other hand, some commercial disputes have actually arisen because of a problem to do with how somebody answered a phone call or responded to an email. They've arisen because of an issue to do with someone's words and behaviours. Quite often they go deeper than just the dry legalities of the claim in defence, the legal rights and wrongs. And some good examples of that are where it's family businesses, where there are family relationships that are going to suffer as a result of what's going on with the business. And also in terms of a lot of commercial disputes, they may need to continue to relate or do business after the settlement, or actually if it is a family business, it's about keeping the family together after the settlement has been reached. So some commercial disputes do have interpersonal elements, so can to an extent be addressed with an interpersonal model. Let's think about another area. In divorce and separation, can we use an interpersonal model? Does it apply there? Well, to an extent, no, because what we're talking about with divorce and separation, which tends to be referred to as family mediation, I don't like the term. I think it's slightly misleading. It's divorce and separation mediation, but what we need is a legal process, because we have to come up with a legally binding court order at the end of a family mediation, and there is a need for full financial disclosure from parties, and if they don't fully financially disclose, then there can be consequences. So to an extent there is a litigious overlay with doing mediation for divorcing and separating couples. And the third thing is that, you know, the agreement might impinge on more than just that couple. So there may be assets to be divided up, which there may be other parties who've got interests in those assets. Certainly there would be children or relatives who might be affected by the divorce settlement. So there is a need for this legal overlay when you're looking at divorce and separation. So there might be an argument to say that the interpersonal model doesn't quite apply to divorce and separation, but in our experience, some couples who are splitting up, there are maybe things that they need to agree about that would not be subject to the formal consent order. So there might be things about who picks Johnny up from Scouts, or who takes Jane to gymnastics, or who sort of gets to do these duties or perform these responsibilities. They're not necessarily going to be written up in a formal consent order. So there might be aspects of the agreement that the couple makes that are not going to be formalised and put across a judge's desk. And also there might be mediation needed if somebody doesn't keep to their agreement, which is, we get quite a bit of this, people saying, no, we've got our agreement through mediation, but my ex is not sticking to his or her side of the bargain. What can we do? And there may be a need for a conversation, a facilitated conversation, if we like, so that they can get back to a place where they are both sticking to the agreement. And also there may be, and there often is, a need for an ongoing relationship after the separation is finalised. The parents may want children to see that their mum and dad are actually getting on and are actually modelling, you know, a good collaborative relationship, even though they're not any longer living together. So that's a really good place for the interpersonal model. Okay, so we have interpersonal disputes. We're talking about how there is an overlap. So in many commercial disputes, in many disputes around divorce and separation, the interpersonal model can work very well. So there are distinct approaches there about commercial and divorce and separation, but actually resolving the relational, behavioural elements of any conflict will often unstick it. So my argument would be from that section to say that there is usually an interpersonal element to every dispute. And if we can attend to the people issues, look at what's going on between the two individuals, aside from the dry, commercial, litigious, consent order driven issues, then we may get to the heart of the conflict and resolve it a whole lot better. So let's change gear a little bit. How about some conflict? I'm going to show you a short video clip. Let's watch that and then we'll talk about it.
Sally and Heather work together in the accounts department of Connors Plumbing Supplies. Heather has been in her role for some years, while Sally has only recently joined the department following a reshuffle. There is some bad feeling from Heather over Sally's appointment, with Heather claiming that Sally only got the job because of her friendship with James, the departmental manager. Sally and James had worked together over a number of years before the current reshuffle. Sally claims in return that Heather over-scrutinises her work and her timekeeping and is cold and unfriendly with her. The two have quite different approaches to work, and this has begun to cause some tension. James has no issue with the two of them getting the job done, but has needed to speak to them separately about the importance of getting on together. They continue to rub each other up the wrong way, and there is often an atmosphere in the office. It is Tuesday morning, a few days before the deadline for an important report to be completed. Sally is on the phone to her friend.
Hi Liz, yeah, it's nice to talk to you. Yeah? I was just ringing to find out what time we're going to meet for the theatre on Tuesday. Yeah. We go for about 1:30. Perfect. Yeah, it'd be fantastic to see you then. Oh, actually, do you want to go for a coffee first? That would be great.
Oh, for God's sake, it's not like it's even dinner time or anything.
Yeah, 1:30, Liz. Yeah, that would be absolutely fine. Okay. All right. Bye. What are you doing at the weekend?
Nothing special.
Oh, we're going out with Phil. It's his birthday. Do you know Phil from sales?
Yeah.
It's his 50th. Would you like to come along?
No, it's alright. It's not really my kind of thing.
Oh, it's his 50. You should really enjoy yourself. Come on, you have a fantastic time if you come.
Look, I said no, I don't want to go. We've got this important report to get finished. Perhaps we should be getting on with that instead of organising our social life.
Well, oh, has she had a second baby yet? Oh, that's lovely. She had a little boy. What's she called him? Oh, that's really nice. Hold on a minute.
Sorry to interrupt. How's your part of the report going?
Yeah, getting it done.
Do you think you'll have it done by tonight? Only I've got mine finished and I need to work yours into it.
By tomorrow. Yes, hi Ruth. Sorry for the interruption.
Sorry, Sally, I've not finished.
Sorry Ruth, I'll have to ring you back.
You've been on the phone for nearly 20 minutes. You could be doing your report then.
I'm
Before
on the
that, you
phone
had a break.
to Ruth from Albright's.
Well, it doesn't sound like it. You was on for at least 20 minutes and before that having a break.
Is that right? That's the crux of it, isn't it? You are constantly monitoring when I go for my break. You think you're in charge, well you're not. You're always evaluating what I'm doing and timing when I have my breaks. I've had enough of it.
No, I don't. You're just being bloody childish now. For God's sake, can you just get your part of the work done? I've had enough of this. You're an absolute nightmare. I'm going to have to speak to James.
goes to see James to complain about what she sees as Sally's lack of commitment to the job, distracting behaviour and disregard for important deadlines. James spends some time with Heather and then asks to speak to Sally, who tells James that she is upset about aspects of Heather's manner towards her. Later that morning, James gets them together for a joint conversation, partly about the day's events, but also about the more long-standing conflict between the two of them. James has previously spoken to the two of them about their working relationship and feels that he has done all he can. He proposes that they try mediation to build a better understanding of each other. An external mediator is brought in. He starts by seeing the two colleagues separately with the intention of getting them together later on.
So we can see there a classic workplace conflict, a bit of a difference of values, a difference of working style, different approach to the work, and clearly a communication breakdown between the two that results in a significant kick-off in the kitchen where angry words are exchanged and off they go to get the big guns involved. So fairly classic sort of dispute. That's actually a clip from one of our training videos, by the way. Let's have a think if the conflict you saw there progressed into mediation, how would it work? So we're going to take a bit of a look at a slightly light-hearted view of what would happen if that particular situation was referred to a mediator. Clearly the manager would want to try and resolve it first. He or she would have a facilitated conversation with these two, maybe have a quiet word with them, try and get them on the same page. If that didn't work, or if there are any other reasons to do with all sorts of factors why the local manager couldn't do it, then it might get referred to a third-party mediator. So we're going to work through this, how does mediation work, in terms of reference to a cartoon strip that we did for an exhibition a little while ago. So this was something we did when we had a comic book themed exhibition stand, way before this here pandemic, a couple of years ago, at an exhibition of ours. So we're going to look at that comic strip as a way to illustrate the mediation process. So what happens is that we have an initial contact with the first party. So here's the mediator, who happens to be me, in our comic strip, having the initial contact with party one. So in a confidential session with that individual, she's volunteered to come forwards, has agreed to some terms around the mediation and tells her story. So we spend a good deal of time hearing from the first party, doesn't matter who goes first, and then we swap around and we hear from the second party. So treating them the same, very much hearing about what's been happening. The mediator's interest is in trying to reframe, and the mediator's thinking at this point is, yes, we're going to hear the history, yes, we're going to hear all of the tales about it's the other person who's in the wrong, etc. But the mediator's thinking about, okay, what do each of these individuals need in order to move this forwards to a place where they start to negotiate and collaborate better. So the mediator there doing some serious thinking with the two of them in mind. His job is to remain impartial, to pay equal attention and have equal concern for both of their sets of interests, and think about whether it's appropriate to bring them together. Sometimes we don't. In normal times we might think about either having them in the room or keeping them separate and doing shuttle mediation. At the moment, of course, it's all online anyway. So the consideration would be, is it feasible to have these two online? Interestingly for us, just by the way, during pandemic, some cases that probably wouldn't have come into face-to-face mediation have been addressed in online mediation because the parties are happy enough to meet online, although they wouldn't have got in a room together. And conversely, there have been disputes where the parties are not even prepared to meet on a screen. We've had to shuttle between them to do individual Zoom or Teams meetings with the two parties without actually having them appear side by side on the screen. So the hostility and the temperature is so high that they don't even want to be on a screen together. So all of these considerations would be in the mediator's mind, and he or she would be thinking about as well whether we have issues that can be mediated. So assuming we go go forwards to a face-to-face session, then the mediator gets them together. The mediator's job is to hear from both parties, to have them agree to some rules, to make sure they agree to things like taking it in turns to speak, not using any name calling and so on. We get to hear on the left-hand side of the cartoon box there, we're hearing from the two individuals, the kind of things that they would be saying if they came into mediation. And then the mediator brings that together into an agenda. So we're looking at what it is that needs to be negotiated so that we can explore and work on those issues. We want to hear from both parties. There will be emotion involved. We see the one party there is tearful, the other one's quite angry. We don't minimise the emotion. It's necessary for them to express that, to do something with it, and for them to see that their own words and behaviours have had an impact on the other individual. This is the negotiation part of the process. So in the stage 5, we are negotiating around our agenda, allowing a balance of emotion and reason, the mediator making sure the rules are kept to, but essentially making sure it's their conversation that takes place. And to an extent, the mediator is a facilitator of that conversation. He or she is not part of it, and they're certainly not dictating what their agreements or their resolutions should be. We work our way through these issues. Generally speaking, a joint session will take you about half a day, 3.5 hours, 4 hours maybe, to the point where they have discharged a lot of the emotion and bad feeling. They have put their heads together and negotiated around the agenda items. They've had the chance with the mediator they've hopefully let the mediator reframe, so they are taking the opportunity to move forwards rather than looking backwards, and then they get to the point where they are making suggestions for what they can do differently. So there we are making suggestions for what could happen. We build an agreement out of this. It's a good faith agreement, it's not a binding contract, it's something that they need to make it work. It's not something that could be enforced to any degree, but because of the fact that they come up with themselves, that they have reached that agreement, it's not been imposed, or they've not been told what to do, it's far more likely that they would make it work. So having built that agreement, and they sign it off symbolically to say, yep, this is the form of words that will describe how we're going to structure our working relationship into the future. Then mediator writes that up, we get their signatures on it, we close the thing down, and we follow up. So we will always follow up after 6 weeks or so, make sure that the agreement they've come up with is working, doesn't need revisions, that there's no need for any further support. So that very, very briefly is what interpersonal mediation looks like. You can find in our library of webinars various illustrations of that, including there is some video clips. There's a collection of video clips from this same dispute here with Heather and Sally. So if you want to see more detail about how the mediation process works, because I've covered it very quickly there, then do please visit the library of webinars, and we'll give you the address at the end. Also our own model, which we call Retalk, which is something we've come up with over the last 21 years and many hundreds of cases, is also illustrated. There's a link just appeared in the chat box where you can find out about our model and how we do mediation. So if that's whetted your appetite, you might be thinking, okay, so how do I become a mediator? It's open to anybody. We often get asked, is there any need for any prior qualification? Not really. Do I need to have knowledge of the law to become a mediator? Not really. What backgrounds do people come from when they come into mediation? Well, any at all. So we've trained people who are ex-military, ex-police officers, HR professionals, people that come from youth work, social work, people that have worked in publishing, accountancy, auditing. I'm just running through my head all the places that people have come from. A film producer, a motor mechanic. So anybody at all can become a mediator. There's a need for a bit of studying, there's a need for training, so there is that need to have that initial qualification and reach a standard. And then I would recommend all sorts of things for when you go out and start mediating, which I'll come on to. But let's start with training. So here we are. Here's a picture from one of our training courses. What you need to do is get a recognised qualification. So be careful, because there's a lot of sort of maverick provision in the field. Make sure you've got a course that's externally accredited. So you need to be sure that there is a proper qualification there, that the qualification you're doing should be on a recognised framework. If you want more detail about that, we're very happy to help. You need a training course from an organisation who's got quality assurance, and it needs to be future-proofed. So be sure that whatever badges or accreditations, they are future-proofed and they're going to still apply in 5, 10, 15 years' time. Be sure it's the right type of mediation. So some of the gist of this webinar today is talking about whether the interpersonal model can apply to other sorts of disputes. And I was saying I'd come back to this. So here I come back to this. So a commercial mediation course will not be appropriate for doing workplace mediation. And I've seen all sorts of problems where people who've trained in what's become popularly called civil mediation, they then go into workplace disputes and they're asking rather litigious, sort of blame-focused, evidence-focused questions of the parties, even in one case asking, do you have authority to settle this dispute? Well, my goodness me. So, you know, people who've trained in that model, a purely civil model, shouldn't really be trying to apply that to workplace mediation. It doesn't work. So be sure that you're doing the right kind of training. There is no one-size-fits-all. And again, back to that point about interpersonal, there are interpersonal elements to almost every dispute. But if you want purely to do evaluative work on civil disputes and train as a civil mediator and do this sort of hybrid between legal practice and dispute resolution, then, you know, that's something that we don't do. So that's a long way away from the kind of work that we do, which is looking at the people who are in conflict, the psychology of conflict, looking at trying to understand the people in order to resolve their conflict. Be sure that you're doing the right kind of mediation course. And again, I could apply the same arguments to family mediation for divorcing and separating couples. You need to do a specific training for family mediation, albeit that there are certain aspects of relationships between couples that can indeed be addressed with an interpersonal model. But just be careful that you're doing the right kind of course. And also make sure that there's post-course support. So you don't want somebody to train you and then dump you. So be sure there is some follow-on, be sure that there are progression routes, be sure that there is somewhere that you can go as you start to get experience, and make this into a, you know, think about it in terms of continual development. And on a personal note, I've been doing this for 21 years. I've done over 1,200 cases at last count. And I'm still learning, and it's not just that old platitude. You know, I do still learn from cases, very interested in the work I do, very interested in seeing how people deal with conflict and how we can resolve it, even in the most intractable, apparently intractable situations. So be sure that you do have your own support. Do be sure that the organisation that trains you, they should have a learner portal, they should have progression routes, they should have a helpline. You should be able to call that organisation for help after you've trained. And make sure that that's in place. Once you're trained, you need to get yourself some experience. If you're working as a freelancer, good idea that when you've trained and you want to go out there as a freelance mediator, look at your existing connections, exploit what you've got, look at your expertise. If you've come from publishing or from accountancy, maybe that's the area in which you could get some work. That'd be great. You've got a foot in the door, maybe you speak the language. Think about if you've trained as a mediator and you're freelancing out there, maybe, you know, pick a niche, pick an area. I think doing a free case or two can be a really good idea, and working alongside another mediator just to get your confidence, find your feet, start to embed your training, start to apply the skills you've learned. It's a really good way to give and receive feedback with a co-mediator to get yourself started, get your feet under the mediation table. Marketing, of course, you're going to need a website, good social media presence. That's key these days, particularly during the pandemic. So we're not going out and doing exhibitions. We're not doing live demonstrations at the moment. It's all about online. So that's a key thing for your marketing. Good online presence, good website. Make sure people know who you are. And you've got to promote it. A lot of people still are not fully aware of mediation, what it is and how it works. So you're going to need to do some promotional work so that people get on board with the ideas that I'm talking about today, really. And then as a general marketing exercise, you think about what's unique about your offer. What's your unique selling proposition? What is it that you can offer that somebody else can't? So all mediators are not created the same. It's a set of skills and a way of thinking about conflict which you can lay over your existing professional expertise. We do get a lot of inquiries from people who are thinking about portfolio career. Maybe they offer different things to organisations, coaching, debt advice, HR advice, and they want to do mediation alongside that. So think about, you know, what's your offer? What is it that you can offer that the next guy down the road can't? So that's if you're a freelancer. If you're thinking of training so that you can offer mediation within your organisation. So larger organisations, we work with a lot of people who want to set up an internal panel. Tends to be larger employers. but we set up these panels of in-house mediators so that they can resolve particularly workplace disputes, but also applies equally well to housing and neighbourhood disputes and other stuff as well, complaints. So what you need to do as an in-house provider, mediation provider, is you need to do a marketing job internally. So you need to promote and publicise your service. Newsletters, web pages, internal events, recruitment fairs, all sorts of things that you can do internally, led ideally by a mediation champion. For an in-house service, there needs to be an individual who's got this glowing red phone on his or her desk, which is the mediation phone. Somebody that people can call to ask about suitability of cases, to get advice on making referrals internally to the panel of in-house mediators. It needs to be somebody who's got their name attached to your mediation provision. Run awareness raising events. There's no substitute for showing people what mediation looks like. And again, back to our webinars, you can see on there's several demonstrations showing you actually nuts and bolts of what a mediation looks like and what happens. Mediation is quite easy to understand, but very difficult to do. It's also quite difficult to get the ideas across. So what we've learned over the years is much better at showing, not telling. So live events are great. And using, consultative support and case supervision to, to get your confidence, to build your expertise, to get feedback on your work, making sure that you get this consultative support so that you know you're doing it right. Co-mediation as well helps build the confidence, of course. And then progression. You need add-on courses, you need next steps programs. I got brackets PPM there. We do a next step program called Professional Practice in Mediation. It's the only level 5 qualification in existence. It's something that people who qualified and start to get cases can actually progress into. And there are several other routes as well. I won't go into detail here, but many ways that you can progress following your initial training. And the third strand of becoming an interpersonal mediator is about getting credibility. This is something that you do need in order to prove your mettle and prove to your potential customers, be they freelance customers or your internal customers if you're part of an internal in-house panel. It's about gaining credibility. We recommend that you get IMI qualified, and we recommend you get accredited mediator status. So without going into too much of the detail, train with us and you get accredited by UK Mediation and by AIM Awards, so that your qualification sits on a recognised framework with Ofqual, which is the regulator of exams in England and Wales. And this IMI qualified is the next level as well. This is something that we've done to coincide with Brexit. So now we have International Mediation Institute recognition for our training. So you get an internationally recognised qualification, which goes beyond just the UK levels of recognition, so that you have this assurance of quality, assurance of integrity of your practice, and an assurance that you're accountable for your practice as well. Already mentioned about show not tell. The other thing I would draw out from this slide here is about repeat referrals. There is a very high rate of repeat business in mediation. So if you do a good job, you will get another referral. It happens with us all the time. We'll get one referral from company X, we go out, mediate, resolve their dispute, and then the next week or two we'll get another 2 referrals from them. And many of the customers we've had over the last 21 years are people who have referred cases to us time and time again. We get several cases a year from them. So the repeat business, the customer loyalty is really, really important. And that's something that you need to work towards as an effective and established interpersonal mediator. Okay, so various badges, various forms of credibility. Our own accredited mediator badge is considered very, very high recommendation for the quality of your training and provision, and look at international recognition now as well, now that we're out of the European Union. Okay, all a bit dry, all fairly technical, but hey, you know what? It's quite good being a mediator. So what's good about becoming a mediator? I'm going to pop up and tell you. Here I am. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of variety. No 2 cases are ever the same, and that is true. It's not just one of those platitudes. We don't, I would get bored if it was all the same. It certainly isn't. It's a very interesting, quite stimulating sort of career. It's a very, if you're curious about people's predicaments and about people's stories, it's a great place to be working. Some situations that come to us and the referrers are throwing their hands up, be it a complaint scenario, a medical mediation scenario, a workplace or neighbourhood. These situations look intractable, but actually we've got some really powerful tools, and it's surprising to the referrer sometimes that is what we can actually resolve using these very powerful tools. And it works very well if you're a freelancer thinking about doing this as a strand of a portfolio career. It works really, really well. It's a really good sort of string to add to your bow, let's say. It is hard work, can be very rewarding, and you know what? Ultimately, you're saving people's relationships, livelihoods. Many of the situations we've done, it's a last chance sometimes for people to keep their tenancy, keep their job, continue working in a particular location or in a particular team. So, you know, it's quite profound results that you reach by applying all of this stuff to do with interpersonal mediation. So that's my 40 minutes on the nose. I think I'm going to expect a round of applause from my colleagues here for having kept the time today. We have an opportunity for any questions. So if there are any comments or questions that people would like to ask, now's your chance. Quite often we get questions after the webinar or when people watch the recording, but we usually get a few here as well. So here's one from Dawn. Dawn, I'm interested possibly in family and child mediation, and I'd like to gain some volunteering experience. Wondered whether Child Contact Centre might be a useful start, or charities like Bernardo's and so on who offer family support volunteering posts. Yes, I think so. I think that would be a really good place to start, Dawn. Looking at the charities like Bernardo's. Who else do we work with? We work with YMCAs. You might talk to night stops as well, night stops all around the country who work with family and child mediation. This is an area of mediation partly to do with homelessness prevention, by the way. There's been a move in the last few years to ensure that youngsters are not getting ejected from their family homes, and that one way of doing that is to offer mediation within families between the young person and his or her carers or parents. But yeah, that would be a great idea for getting some experience there. Really useful start. So Bernardo's, etc., YMCA's, night stops, and other organisations. A lot of charities, a lot of third sector provision in this area, as well as some provision by local authorities. And of course, to get trained in mediation. So we have trained a lot of mediators who work with family relationships, who work with preventing homelessness. So if you'd like a chat about that, Dawn, you're very welcome to give us a buzz, and we'll help you along the way. Another one from Caitlin, who says, I'm a trained civil mediator. I'm thinking about branching out into the interpersonal side of things. Can I just go ahead and do this, or do I need further training? Yeah, it's really on point, really, Caitlin, with what I was saying about the mix-up of the models. Short answer is I would get some conversion training. If you try and apply a civil mediation model to working with interpersonal disputes, you're going to find it's not going to work. There's a real sort of contrast in the two models. So in interpersonal, what we're doing is speaking privately to people, and then if it's appropriate, the stage 3 that you saw on the cartoon strip, we think about getting them together for a discussion where people attend on their own, speak for themselves. Ultimately, it's balancing emotion and reason, getting to the point where they feel they can actually collaborate and get on without coming into dispute all the time, and then writing a good faith agreement about their behaviours and how their words and behaviours are going to change from this point onwards. That is in stark contrast to what civil mediators do or commercial mediators do, which is people attend with their solicitors or representatives. We have a very brief joint chat, and then people go into separate rooms and the mediator shuttles between them, ultimately coming up with a settlement around finances and contracts, payments of amounts of money, redoing goods and services. And then that gets written up with the lawyer's help into a binding contract. So there's a lot of differences. So I would suggest, Caitlin, if you're not going to confuse yourself and possibly your service users, I would get some conversion training, and or think about going out and doing some co-mediation or some work with a workplace or interpersonal mediator. And Karen, I'm looking to attend training Manchester in November. After completion, and I'm successful, can I be a member on the UK Mediation panel? Well, not straight away, Karen. So we do have a very busy panel. We have a faculty of mediators, faculty of trainers. mostly they are qualified to the level 4 level with us, and then they have around about 4 or 5 years post-qualification experience. So what we need for our panel is for people to have done an externally accredited training, ideally level 4, and then to go out, get some experience, and once they've got a few years experience under their belts, come back, pass an interview, and then we'll consider them for our panel. And then there are a few other steps to go through before we send them out actually into the field, as it were. The other thing is about that, we're talking about IMI recognition for our training, International Mediation Institute. The progression route that you might be thinking about there, Karen, is when you've done your qualification, you've got your IMI certified. So IMI certified means you've done a course that is recognised by the International Mediation Institute. Big tick, by the way, for that international recognition. It's recognised through a lot of the world, and certainly all the way across mainland Europe. So that's great. Then you start to go out and do your cases. And once you've done a tranche of cases, and once you've written those up and submitted them, you can actually go onto a register, which is the IMI qualified register. So you become an IMI certified mediator. And there is a register internationally accessed. So you're qualified first and certified later. Sorry if I got those words the wrong way around. IMI qualified first. And then once you do your cases, write them up, you go on to the IMI certified mediator register, which is an international register of mediators who've not just done a high quality qualification, but have proven they can apply their training in practice. So that's the place to go, Karen. And then in terms of going on our panel, once you've reached that higher level, we'd be very interested to hear from you. We have a lot of cases with a lot of mediators out there all the way around the UK. Maybe come back to us in a few years when you're approaching the certified mediator status, and we'd be pleased to hear from you. I'll take one last question from Jakob. 20-year-old student. I study international relationships. Very interesting, Jakob. Nice to hear from you. I really want to become a professional. What should I do? Where should I start? Books, videos, looking for trainings. Okay. I think there's a chat in that, Jakob, but what might be a good idea, as well as that chat, take a look at our webinar library. There's a whole load of stuff there in our webinars, all aspects of mediation, all aspects of mediation training. You would certainly be well informed if you worked your way through a few of our webinars, all free to access, and there's a link just come up in the chat box, and you're very welcome to take a look there. Okay, I always try and keep to time. I get a gold star if I manage to get these finished in under 50 minutes. So in the last couple of minutes today, just talking about webinars, you can register for any of the upcoming webinars at the address that's just come up there, and that's going to appear in the chat box. You're welcome, Jakob. And in February, we're doing online mediation in action, very appropriate at the moment. How you can carry out your practice online. We've got a simulated workplace dispute, mediated by me, expert advice on how to mediate via virtual platforms. So we've got very used to doing mediation over Zoom and Teams, and we'll show you how that works with a simulated case on the webinar on Friday, 12th of February. So that's the next one. There are others in the pipeline. You will find them on our website. The links have appeared in the chat box. So take a look there, and also keep in touch. We do like to stay in touch with people. If you check out our YouTube, you can like and subscribe. You can check out our Twitter. We've got LinkedIn presence as well, or have a look at our Facebook. And you will find many, many more resources and lots of ways to keep in touch with us. There we have it. This is all about today becoming an interpersonal mediator. I hope that's helpful to you. I hope it's been interesting. Answered some of the questions. If you think of anything else you want to know, just get in touch with us afterwards. If you're watching the recording, likewise, you're very welcome to give us a call. We'd be pleased to have a chat with you, answer any questions you may have. So thanks for watching for today. Stay safe, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.